It's not something I do very often due to the political situation. Bethlehem is in the West Bank. I'm in Israel. But it's definitely one of my favorite cities in the area. There's something in the atmosphere there that if you've been to Jerusalem and Bethlehem, you know that, you get it when you walk in the street. There's something there that I really, really love. So I want to share with you a little bit background about the city and a little bit about the current situation in the city and the church. And maybe the best way to start is by saying that 2 weeks ago, the Church of Nativity was reopened. I don't know if you follow the news about the coronavirus in the Holy Land, but Bethlehem had a big problem with a group of tourists who were detected as positive for the COVID-19, and then there were many cases in Bethlehem. So the first church to be closed in the Holy Land was the Church of Nativity in the beginning of March. Later on, also the other churches were closed, and then finally it was reopened on the 27th of May. It's open for pilgrims, but there are no pilgrims. They're only the local faithful who go and pray there. And just look at the group of men who stand here in front of the church. I mean, that's not the kind of habits you probably see in all the churches in the US. But we're going to get to that later on. You have a Franciscan here, you have Armenian, you have Greek Orthodox. These are also Armenian, and this is a Palestinian policeman. And they're all connected to the church. They're standing in front of the church. And that's part of the story of the Holy Land. This diversity of different communities, sometimes working together, sometimes less, working with the authorities, because you cannot run any institution, even like a church, without having proper relationship with the authorities. So in the case of Bethlehem, it's the Palestinians. In Jerusalem, it's Israel. So this complexity of having different communities, different people, different denominations, it's all part of the story of Bethlehem. But let's start from the beginning. Let's start with Rachel tomb. Rachel tomb is located north to Bethlehem. In the book of Genesis, it says that Rachel died and she was buried on the way to Ephrath, that is Bethlehem. Over her tomb, Jacob set up a pillar, and to this day, the pillar marks Rachel's tomb. There is a site north to Bethlehem that is commemorated the death place, the burial place of Rachel. And the tomb of Rachel is mentioned, or the place of Rachel is mentioned in the book of Jeremiah, and also quoted in the Gospel according to Matthew, when Herod decides to kill all the children under the age of 2 in the Bethlehem and Judea area because he's afraid of Jesus. And since the Bankys, the kings, didn't come to tell him where Jesus is, there's a quote from the book of Jeremiah, a voice is heard in Ramah. This is a quote from Jeremiah. Weeping and great mourning, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because there are no more. The children are no, the sentence, the verse is very sad. As a mother, she's crying for the babies. She's crying for the children. In the book of Jeremiah, it relates to the Israelites going to the exile, and she's crying. But this is not a sad prophecy. This is the prophecy of a comforting prophecy, because the next sentence, the next verse, restrain your voice from weeping and your eyes from tears, for your work will be rewarded, declares the Lord. They will return from the land of the enemy. So when Jesus goes on his way to Egypt, he will be back. And in the Gospel according to Matthew, don't quote the next verse, but we all know, I mean, all of us who read the Gospel, Christians who read the Gospel, anyone who reads the book of Jeremiah knows that it's a comforting prophecy. They will be back. This is the beginning of the return of the salvation. So yes, it starts difficult, but there will be an exodus from Egypt. Jesus will come back from Egypt. Now, it's interesting because in the book of Jeremiah and also the book of Samuel, it seems that the tomb of Rachel was not supposed to be north to Bethlehem, but north to Jerusalem. If the people went to exile towards the north, toward Babylon, they probably didn't go from Bethlehem up north, but from Jerusalem north. And there's another location a bit north to Jerusalem where some scholars suggest that there was another site for the tomb of Rachel. But the story of Jesus and the story of Jacob bearing Rachel next to Bethlehem became much more popular, and therefore the site of Rachel is still a pilgrimage site for women, for men, from all the from Jewish and Christian background. Today, the tomb of Rachel is mainly visited by Jews, and especially by women. In the beginning of the Jewish year, there is the anniversary of Rachel, and a lot of women go and attend the prayer there, and mainly single women and women who pray for children, who wish to have children, go and pray there. So again, connecting Rachel, who died while giving birth to her child, with Rachel crying for the children who died by the hand of Herod, but again with the hope for the salvation, for the return, for coming back from the land of the enemy. So we getting closer to Bethlehem after visiting the tomb of Rachel, and we're being reminded of Ruth. And we just celebrated the Feast of Shavuot, the Feast of Pentecost, 50 days after Passover. In the Feast of Shavuot, we read the story of Ruth, because the story takes place in the time where they collected the harvest in the area of Bethlehem. And Ruth is a very interesting person because she's a Moabite, and Moabite were not supposed to get together with the Israelite. I mean, in the book of Deuteronomy, just to quote, it says, "No Ammonite or Moabite or any of the descendants may enter the assembly of Lord, not even in the 10th generation, for they did not come to meet you with bread and water on your way when you came out of Egypt." And they actually hired someone, Bilam, to curse the Israelites. So, they were supposed to stay away. But Ruth, who was married to the son of Naomi, she decided to join her in-law, and they came to Bethlehem. She, for me, as a Jew who reads the story, she symbolizes these people, these outsiders who entered the people of Israel. She joined Naomi, she came to Bethlehem, she found Boaz, she married him. She was a woman of what we call in Hebrew chesed, which is special kindness, almost altruistic kindness. She was ready to give up everything, her extended family, her life as a Moabite, to come into a place to live in poverty, to marry Boaz, maybe not the first choice, he was not a young person, to work hard to collect the harvest, maybe not something she was used to. She's definitely a very kind woman. And she's one of the four women who are mentioned in the genealogy of Jesus as a great-grandmother of King David. There are special women who are mentioned in this first chapter of the Gospel according to Matthew. Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, the wife of Uriah. So there are four women who are totally not the typical perfect mothers or the matriarchs. We don't hear about Sarah or Rachel, or it's these four women because they're very special. They did something different. They were not just like the others. They had faith. They were very kind. And yes, they and from their descendants, King David and later on Jesus came. So she was a special woman coming from outside. And I always think about it as, Jesus was not talking just to the Israelites, but he was already opening windows to people outside. So this is another hint for someone from outside to enter the people of Israel, to join with them on the way to salvation. So Ruth the Moabite joining Naomi to go to Bethlehem, where she will be able to continue this genealogy to lead to King David and later on to Jesus. And then we get to the book of Samuel, where we hear the story of Jesse. And Samuel the prophet was sent to Bethlehem to find someone else to replace Saul. And Jesse is mentioned in the book of Isaiah as that there shall come forth a shoot from the stump of Jesse, and a branch shall grow out of his roots. And he would be the one who would bring this ultimate utopic world where all the animals would live in peace and everyone would know God. And so Jesse is not just a father, but he's kind of the head of the family from where the root, the shoot of salvation would come. And he's asked to show his son to Samuel, and he says, well, I have a couple of sons, and which one of them do you want to see? And although Samuel is very much impressed by Eliab, but then God said, no, don't pay attention to the sight, don't pay attention to the appearance. Ask him for another son. And Jesse said, well, I do have another son. Well, he's now with the sheep. He's a shepherd. He's small. He's young. Probably that's not the one you're looking for. But Samuel insists, and then they sent for him. And he was glowing with health and a fine appearance and handsome feature. And then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Jesse was presenting his son. And from his family, from the youngest one, not the very impressive one, not the first one that really impressed Samuel, that's where the salvation would come from the youngest one. He would be the king. And this is a painting, a wall painting, a mural from Dora Europos Synagogue. Dora Europos Synagogue is now in Syria. It was discovered in the beginning of the 20th century. It's a synagogue from the 3rd century that was used by Jews who were probably merchants working in that area. And in the 3rd century, they renovated their synagogue and covered it with painting with scenes from the Tanakh, from the Old Testament, from the Hebrew scriptures. Now, that's not something we used to see a lot. Most of the synagogues you see today, you will not see scenes from the Torah, from the Bible, from the Old Testament. But this synagogue is quite special in that sense. And what we see here is we see Samuel anointing King David. And you see all the brothers stand behind with a certain gesture showing respect. And David himself, covered with a purple gown, which is a color that was used by emperors in the Roman time. And it seems like, he's going to be the next king. But he covers his hand. And covering the hand was a custom that you would do when you receive something as a soldier, when you receive something from the commander in the army. When you receive something from the emperor, you don't show your hands, you cover your heads. So on one hand, he's covered with this purple gown, indicating he's going to be something very, very important. He's going to be the king. He doesn't know that yet, but on the other hand, he's very humble. He's covering his hand. And Samuel looks very high, and no one knows why they picked Samuel so high, because he was not especially tall. Maybe because the donor who donated the money to make these murals on the walls, he was named Samuel. So maybe that's why they made Samuel higher. But he's anointing King David, who is covered with his royal gown, but humble. And that's what you're supposed to be. That's a real savior. That's a real king. You shouldn't be too arrogant. You should respect the one who anoints you. You should respect the one to whom you're supposed to report. But you have a royal status. So I think this painting kind of reflects that, and it's 3rd century. It's also connected to the prophecy that is quoted again in the Gospel according to Matthew. It's not exactly quoted in the Gospel, but it's referred to in the Gospel according to Matthew from the prophecy of Micha, where Micha talks about the young person, the small among the clan of Judah. Out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel. So don't be confused by the appearance as Samuel was, because from the smallest ones, from the small in the clan, the Savior would come. And this is very much resonance to Jesus. He was not born in a luxury house. He was not even born in a hotel, because there was no place in the hotel. He was born in a little cave with the animals. He was placed in a manger after he was born. He was really the small among the clan. I mean, small, not someone you would expect that would definitely at the end save the world. So the way King David is described in the book of Samuel and the way he's referred to in the book of Micha definitely connect to the way Jesus' birth is being described. And I would continue with a quote from Michal, which is not quoted in the Gospel according to Matthew. And I again read it again. But you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, through you are small among the clans of Judah. Out of you will come for me one who will be the ruler over Israel, whose origin are of old, from ancient times. And if you read this, the full quote in the book of Michal, in a Christian perspective, and again, I'm Jewish, but I put now the Christian lenses from ancient times. The origin is not from now. It's not something modern. It's not something from the time of King David. It's not something from the time of Michal, but it's something that goes back to ancient time. So King David is the smallest. He's born in Bethlehem. He's anointed in Bethlehem. He's going to be the ruler. He's going to lead the Israelites to create a very wide kingdom. And just like him, we'll hear about a similar king that was born in the same place. He was also small, he was born in a simple place, and he would also lead, according to Christian faith, to another kingdom. And we're jumping in the history, because yes, I don't have to repeat with you the story of the Gospels. Jesus' birth is described in two Gospels, the Gospel according to Matthew, the Gospel according to Luke. And both of them describe Jesus being born in a small place with the animals, being placed in a manger, in a very poor place, the place that you would not expect a leader, a savior to be born, but that's where the salvation comes from. And I always tell my students, I mean, as a Jew, it's not easy to teach another religion, because I feel that, it's not appropriate that I will talk about another religion, which is not necessarily my culture, my tradition, but I always find a way to connect to the things I teach. And I use kind of concepts and ideas from Christianity. And I think what I can learn from that, and I think one of the great messages of the story of the birth of Jesus is that you never know what will come out of a person. I mean, the Savior came out of a baby that was born in a cave because they didn't have a place in their hotel. And then I see a student in a classroom, and maybe he doesn't come from a wealthy family, and maybe he doesn't come from a strong, background and weak socioeconomical background, and maybe his family's not educated. But who knows? Maybe he will be the next president of the U.S. I mean, you can never know. You cannot predict the future of the life of a person just by the way he was born or where he was born. So this is a very important thing for me. And again, as a Jew, I try to learn a lesson from the Christian text, and that's something I think it's very powerful that I take. So Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but that's the end of the story of Bethlehem. Bethlehem will not have another place in the story of Jesus, because he would spend the next years in the Galilee, and then he will come to Jerusalem for the last week of his life, except for the Gospel of John, where he comes more often. He will come to Jerusalem again on the age of 12. But Bethlehem is just for the beginning. It's just for the start. So that's a very important place to start with, but it doesn't have any other role in the story of Jesus. And now with keeping that in mind and seeing how it's being reflected on the ground. Now, the text you can learn back home. You don't need me to teach you anything about Jesus. I mean, that's something you can do when you read the scriptures. But what happened when you come to Jerusalem, and that's why we gathered here. I mean, that's why I'm here and not a preacher or a minister talking about the birth of Jesus, because I want to show you how this story and how this experience is being reflected in the things that you see when you come to visit the places. You don't have to come to Bethlehem. As a Christian, the birth of Jesus is in your heart. You don't need that. But people still do that. And obviously, Elisa wants you to come to Jerusalem and Bethlehem to visit these places. And all of us as tourists want you to come, because I think there's extra meaning. There's an extra experience, an experience that you have when you come here and you see the places. And what I want to do now is present the church of the Nativity as this extra thing that helps you to experience the birth of Jesus in another level. So we'll go a little bit about, talk a little bit about this, the church and how it looks and how it was designed and what's happening in the church. Now I will stop for a second and see there's a long, oh, this Isaiah. Okay, Isaiah 49. Yeah. So you can see that Joy has shared with us in the chapter Isaiah 49, 16 to 26. So for 300 years, we don't know much about the birthplace of Jesus in Bethlehem. Actually, there were no pilgrims to indicate the place or to visit the place or at least to write about the place. We know that the Romans built a temple, a pagan temple on the site where later on the church was built. So there was a pagan temple on the site on the cave where Jesus was born. And in 326, Emperor Constantine destroyed the pagan temple and replaced it with a church. And actually it wasn't him. It was his mother who was doing that. Now, I think it's beautiful that the mother was the one who found the church where the mother of Jesus gave birth to her son. It's not Constantine himself, but the mother. And we'll see that mother have a very important role in the Church of Nativity and in the story of the birth of Jesus. She has a very important role. She would appear again with a very important role toward the end, less in the middle. In the beginning, the end, that's the place of Mary. So the mother of Constantine was the one who came here in 326, and according to the biographer of her son in the Vita Constantina, written by Eusebius of Caesarea, she found the grotto, she found the cave where Jesus was born. You have the whole text in front of you, or apart from the text where it's described. She found the cave, and she built a church. I mean, her son built a church over the site that was identified as the birthplace of Jesus. And Emperor himself soon after testified his reverence for the spot by princely offerings and added to his mother's magnificent by costly presents of silver and gold and embroidered hangings. So the first church was built in Jerusalem in 326 in Bethlehem. Sorry, I'm so used to talk about Jerusalem. If I said Jerusalem, I actually mean Bethlehem. A beautiful church was built over the site where Jesus was born, over the cave. And we're talking about a cave. Now, it doesn't say that he was born in a cave, although it makes sense that if they just stayed in a place with the animals, with the stables, probably it was a cave, not a wooden house, because we don't have so much wood here. But in the 2nd century, when they started to talk about the cave, it became very meaningful because we see the cave in the beginning of the story and we see the cave again toward the end of the story where he was buried. So his birth is very much connected to his death. And there's so many symbols that connect and elements that connect the beginning with the end. So he was born in a cave. The church was built over the cave. It was a very impressive church that was built over the cave, and some of it was excavated in the mosaics. The church was covered with mosaics, were recovered during the excavations that were done. Here you can see it in the 1930s. They literally removed the floor of the church in order to find the earlier mosaics from the 4th century church. But the church was destroyed, and it is beautiful mosaic, indeed. And the church was destroyed actually during the Samaritan revolt. Now, I don't know if you know, but the Samaritan, you hear about the Samaritan in the Gospels. They lived around the area of Nablus, Samaria. It was quite a big community. They're mentioned a couple of times in the Gospels. In the Gospel according to John, the Gospel according to Luke, there's the Samaritan woman in the Gospel of John, there's the Good Samaritan in the Gospel according to Luke. The Samaritans were not part of the Jews. They were separated. They were not accepted by the Jews. The Jews said that they were not originally connected to Judaism at all, or to the Israelites. They came from Assyria. The Samaritans said that they have Israelite roots, and they maintaining, that's the meaning of the word Samaritan, to maintain the authentic tradition of the Bible. So there was a lot of tension between the two groups, and it's reflected in the Gospels. They were not participating in the Great Revolt when the Jews revolted against the Romans that led to the destruction of the temple, but they tried to revolt against the Romans or the Byzantine later on. And during one of these revolts, the Church of Nativity was destroyed. But it was rebuilt by Emperor Justinian. And Justinian was a great builder. He built many churches around the Holy Land and around the empire. If you've been to Ravenna in Italy, you probably have seen his beautiful churches with beautiful mosaics there. But he also left a couple of churches in Jerusalem, and that's actually the church we're going to see today when you visit Bethlehem. In the map that was made in his time, the middle of the 6th century, a map that was found on the floor. It's a map made by as a mosaic on the floor of a church in Jordan today, in the city Madaba. It's a map that shows the Holy Land with the different sites, which is a great source of information for us as historian to identify the different sites that pilgrims visited 1,500 years ago. But there you can see the name Ephrata, which is also mentioned in the book of Genesis, and Bethlehem and the church. So that's the church you can see today. So on mosaic from the 6th century, you can actually see today the same church. The church is still the same church that you will see today in Bethlehem. And this is not obvious. It's actually quite unique. It's the oldest church you can find in the Holy Land that's still standing. Because all the other churches were destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt. This one is still standing from the 6th century. We have nothing like that. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre was destroyed, rebuilt, destroyed, rebuilt. It's only from the 12th century. Other churches you see are mainly from the oldest one from the Crusader time, 12th, 13th century. That means 850 years ago, or 19th century, 17th century. This is 6th century. It's really exciting to see, to find such an old church in the Holy Land. I know 800 sounds also very old for Americans, but you know, here we have all the buildings, but 6th century is quite exciting. So this is still the same church. And I found a picture of the church from the 1930s. So it's quite amazing. It's really beautiful. It's before the excavation. So you see still the complete floor. And now the church looks like that. And you see there are kind of holes in the floor to see the lower floors of the church, lower layers of the church. But of course, when pilgrims come and visit the church, they don't want to see the 6th century church. Maybe they're not so interested in Byzantine architecture as I am, but of course they're interested in the site, in the cave, which is carved in the stone. And that's what makes this place so authentic. It's not the building that they come to visit, but it's the cave that they come to visit. The cave is carved in the rock. So there's something very authentic about it, that you see the rock of the cave. By the way, it's the same thing when you get to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. You don't really see the sepulchre, but you see Golgotha, Calvary. This is the rock. You see the bedrock. And there's something very authentic and exciting about seeing the rock. So people go below the church to the grotto, where they can visit the birthplace of Jesus. And they can visit the rock, the place that believed to be the place where Jesus was born. And it's marked with with a star with 14 corners. And they can also visit the manger, which is opposite the birthplace, where the baby was placed after he was born. I will talk about the sharing of the place later on, but the birthplace belonged to the Orthodox and the manger to the Catholic. But it's very close. I took this picture. It's not a very good one, but you can see that these two places are very, very close to each other, just one facing the other. Yes, and Justinian is the one who built Hagia Sophia and many other churches in the 6th century. Yeah, he was a great builder, so many of the buildings you see, it's his work. So definitely impressive church. The manger was taken, the relics of the manger were taken to Rome in the 7th century. And just half a year ago, relics of the crib was brought back to Jerusalem. It was a great excitement. It's like bringing, bringing something back home. So it was, the Pope decided to give it back to the Franciscan who represent him in the Holy Land. So the relic from the crib was handed to the Franciscan. It spent a day in Jerusalem where pilgrims could visit it, and then it was taken to Bethlehem. So it came back home, at least a relic of it came back home half a year ago. But when you come to visit the Church of Nativity, you also want to remember other things. And the two main things you want to remember are the innocents and Joseph. Maybe I had to start with Joseph. Yeah. The Chapel of St. Joseph. In the Gospel, the story of Joseph, the partner of Mary, the husband, the adopting father of Jesus, he's there just to connect him to the family of Jesse and the family of King David. He's the one who he's the one who received the Annunciation in the Gospel according to Matthew. But we all remember the Gospel according to Luke, where Mary gets is being announced that she will have a child. But he has a very important place in the Gospel according to Matthew. It was somewhere around there, because you remember the Gospel according to Matthew, there were somewhere around Jerusalem and Bethlehem when the angel appeared to him. It was somewhere around there when the angel appeared to Joseph in a dream and told him that Mary going to have a child. So in order to remember him, not to forget him, that he has a very important place in the Annunciation. He has a very important place in the beginning of the story. There's a chapel dedicated to him below the church. There's a whole bunch of tunnels and caves below the church, and one of them is dedicated to Joseph. But there's something else we want to remember when we visit the church. We want to remember that Jesus was saved. Yes, Rachel was crying, was mourning for the babies. Jesus' family managed to escape thanks to the dream that Joseph had. But there are many other innocents who were killed by Herod because he was afraid of this new Messiah. He was afraid of this new threat that would come from Bethlehem. So there's a chapel, there are actually a couple of chapels dedicated to the innocents below the Church of Nativity. So this is a Catholic chapel, but the Orthodox also have a similar chapel, and they also have remnant of bones. Now, these are not bones of the babies, of course, but the fact that you have bones of people who lived around Bethlehem, who were in Bethlehem, maybe pilgrims, again, that connects the death with the life. So beneath the church, we remember Joseph and the innocents. The Catholics also remember another very important person, and I don't know if there are Catholics in the audience, but Jerome. I always like to talk about him because I started to work I had planned to write a dissertation about him and about one of his letters to Ostichium and her mother Paula. But Jerome was a very important person in the 4th century in Rome. He was teaching women in Rome. He was working with the Pope, but when the Pope was changed, then he found himself not excommunicated, but they asked him to live. It's better if you would not be around. You're too much opinionated. So he left to Jerusalem, and in Jerusalem there was another person who didn't want him in Jerusalem because he was too powerful. So he sent him to Bethlehem, where Jerome established a monastery for him, and his colleagues, the women who followed him, also established a monastery for women. And when he was in Bethlehem, he translated the Bible to Latin, and that's the Vulgata. The Vulgata is the official translation used by the Catholic Church, at least until 1965. So the Vulgata is a very important translation because he went back to the Hebrew scriptures and he studied Hebrew in order to translate the Old Testament, the Tanakh, the Hebrew scriptures, to Latin from the Hebrew. Of course, he was influenced by the Septuaginta, but he tried at least to work with the Hebrew. So he was buried in Bethlehem next to the Church of Nativity, and then his body was brought to Rome. But again, in order to remember him, there is a cave, and below the church there's a chapel dedicated to Jerome, and you can see his statue in the middle of one of the quarters in the church. The church was not destroyed like many other churches in the 7th century. When Persians came and occupied the Holy Land and destroyed many other churches, they didn't, because on the facade of the church they saw the image of Jesus and a disciple, and the three kings, the three magos who came to visit him. And they were dressed like Persian. So the Persian occupier thought, oh, we can recognize ourselves on this church, and they did not destroy the church. And this is really amazing, because so many churches were destroyed during that Persian occupation of 14 years that left huge destruction in the Holy Land. I'm jumping to the Crusader time, because they also influenced the church, and there's something else I want to emphasize during the Crusader time that changed the church a bit. But when you enter the church, you can see here, this is the original entry, and I'm going back to, you see, originally there were 3 gates, like many other Byzantine churches, that you enter through them. So one is the main one. Usually as a visitor, pilgrim, you would use the 2 side doors. But then in the Crusader time, they made the doors a bit smaller. So you have the original Byzantine church entry, and then you have a smaller entry with a kind of a pointed arch that was made by the Crusaders in the 12th century. So they limited the size of the entrance. They made it smaller. And then later on, the Christians were afraid of the Muslims who took over the land from the Crusaders. The Mamluks would try to enter the church riding their horses and violate the holiness of the place. So they even made a smaller entry. Now, this is a practical thing. But when, as a pilgrim, and you come there and you actually have to bow in order to enter the church, it makes it much more meaningful. It's like you're bowing in front of God, and then you're entering a huge church. So it's kind of a ceremonial, I mean, as a pilgrim, as a private person, you're kind of going into a ceremonial entry into the church, and the name that was given to this church, to this entry, is the door of humility. You have to go down before you enter. You don't enter like you're an emperor. You enter like a small person through a small hole. During the Crusader time, I would like to emphasize on one thing. The Crusader renovated the church. Crusaders ruled in the Holy Land from the 12th century to the 13th century. They did a lot of work. They built a lot of churches. They renovated many churches. There's nothing special about that. We can find many churches like that around the Holy Land. But what I love about this church is that in the middle of the 12th century, when the Crusader renovated the church, they invited architects and artists from Constantinople to decorate the church. Now, I don't know if you read about the history of the Crusaders. The Crusaders were invited from Europe to help the Byzantine Empire to take over the holy places after the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was destroyed, after different tribes who ruled here limited the Christian from practicing their faith in the different churches. And the Crusaders came here, and they didn't really pay any attention to the local Christian, the Eastern Christian. They came from Europe. They were Catholic. They looked at the Christians here, and they were quite arrogant. They thought, oh, what are these Christians? What language do they speak? Because the Christians who lived here spoke Arabic. Yes, the Christians here in the Holy Land, they speak Arabic, at least from the 7th century, maybe even before. If you remember in the book of Acts, the list of people who mentioning, we have people from different places. Some of them said we are Arabs, so we understand that they also speak Arabic. So in the book of Acts, in the Pentecost, there were also Arabs there. But since the 7th century, everyone speaks Arabic here. So the Crusaders come from Europe to save the Holy Land from the heretics, from the Muslims who speak Arabic, and they come here and they see Christians who have very strange traditions. They also speak Arabic. Very, very strange. So there's a lot of tension between the expatriates, the Christians who came from Europe, and the local Christians. But after 65 years, they started to build relationship. And it started because King Amalek from Jerusalem, the Crusader king, got married with the niece of the emperor from Constantinople. So they had relationship between them, and it led also to collaboration with the renovation of the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we see a lot of art covering the church, and it was just renovated lately, and they actually found some more mosaics in it. You can see some Italian group worked on that and cleaned the mosaics. These are mosaics that look very much Orthodox, but they were made for the Catholic Church. So here we see that the Church of Nativity is also a place of dialogue between East and West. Yes, maybe it started with clashes, but at the end they found a way to work together and to collaborate. And we cannot see that 850 years later, but we can see that with the art. The art presents or reflects this relationship between East and West, even if we look at it 850 years later. Actually, one of the special events during this renovation in 2016 was that a new angel was recovered. They just removed some plaster and they found an angel that we didn't know about. So this is a new angel that reappeared in the Church of Nativity. Yeah, we have to move on. So quickly, I will move and say that, so this is a monastery, this is the cloister just next to the church. It was used by the Augustinian brothers who served in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre during the Crusaders' time. So the Franciscan renovated, and you can still walk in the cloister, and you feel like really you are in the Middle Ages in this, with this beautiful colonnade and beautiful garden in the center. What's going on here? So let's look at the overview of the church.
Good.
And what do we see here? So actually the church today includes the original Justinian church over here. Beneath the center of the church, the grotto of the Nativity. And then we have next to it St. Catherine Church. A church was built probably in the 15th century. It looks like this today. It was renovated in the 19th century. And a cloister. But what are these colors? Now, the Church of Nativity was such an important place after the Crusader left the Holy Land that all the different denominations wanted to have a share in it. So what the Muslim did, is like they did also in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If you visited Jerusalem, you probably have heard about it. They allowed the different communities to use different parts of the church. So the Greek Orthodox Church could use the main hall. The Catholics were giving this area where they renovated the Church of St. Catherine, and they allowed them to renovate a cloister that was used by the Augustinian brothers in the 12th century. The Armenian received a place over here for their monastery and the church, and they also received a little chapel over here. Now you see the different colors. Each community had different part of the church. But the grotto, which is below the church level, that was promised to two communities together, the Orthodox and the Franciscans, the Catholics, with the Armenian who had special rights to pray inside the grotto. Now in 1852, the Ottomans who ruled here decided to freeze the situation. So since the 19th century, that's how the church is divided. If you go to visit the church and you go to the main hall, it's Orthodox. You go to the corner over here, it's Armenian. You go down here, you have one side is Catholic, one side is Orthodox. And on certain days of the year, the Copts of the Syriac have the right to pray here. Do you have something like that in your churches at home? Do you also share it with other denominations? So maybe if you're, mainland Protestant sharing the same space, it makes sense. But Catholic and Orthodox and Armenian, that's not their first priority to share the holy places, but that's a reality they kind of grow up into. They had no other choice. The Muslims divided the church between the communities and allowed the different communities to use different parts of the church. And now it's frozen. You cannot change it. So a couple of pictures. So for example, these are the Orthodox celebrating Christmas Mass in their part on the 7th of January. Yes, they follow an old calendar, the Julian calendar, 13 days behind our calendar. So today is not the 7th of June, but it's the 27th, no, 23 something, 25th of of May. They're 13 days behind. So they will celebrate Christmas when we'll be already the 7th of January. And on the 25th of December, you can find in St. Catherine, the Catholics celebrating Christmas Mass. And on the 7th of January, in the corner on the left, you can find the Armenian praying, same on the corner. Actually, the Armenian don't celebrate Christmas on the 25th of December, which is on the 7th of January, but they actually celebrate on the 6th of January, which is on the 19th of January. And I'm not going to get into all the reasons why they do that, but it's a very old tradition. That you have a corner with where the Copts celebrating on Christmas Day and the Syriac celebrating on Christmas Day. And that's a beautiful thing about this place. It works. Now, it's not as complicated. Sorry? No, I think I stuck into, maybe you can put mute also. So yes, it's not like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre where it's much more complicated, but it is also complicated here because they have to share the church and different parts of the church belong to different communities. And they also have sometimes struggles. Who cleans where, who can pray where, who can go with his procession, at what time, not to step on someone's toes. So you have to work together in order to make it work. And it's amazing because that's the place where the Savior was born, and all this denomination can share the place and be here together. And I want to take the last 5 minutes, I will take 5 more minutes to go outside of the church and to see who is outside. Outside is Manger Square. This is the main square of Bethlehem. That's where people gather. That's if you want to meet someone, you say, hey, meet me at the Manger Square. That's where they have a huge Christmas tree for Christmas. That's where they have the big shows and performance around Christmas time. That's where they have Christmas market. That's where they have the scouts. Scouts. Where's the scouts? Yeah, the scouts. Scouts, that's where the scouts marching on Christmas Eve. And they go all around the city, and the scouts, as you can see, these are not just young people, these are old people. They take part in the scout procession every year before, on Christmas Day or Christmas Eve, presenting their skills. It's all around Manger Square. So this is really the center of the city, everything going around there in Manger Square, and also the main mosque of Bethlehem, Omar Mosque, dedicated to the Muslim ruler who occupied Bethlehem in the 7th century. It's also in the Manger Square. And who are the people who actually live around Manger Square? Now we will dedicate a minute to what they call the living stones. The Christian in Bethlehem, they're not the majority. It used to be a Christian city. Today, 30% of the inhabitants of Bethlehem are Christians. There are two other big villages around Bethlehem, Bethlehem and Bethjala, where they have 70% Christians in these villages. Who are these Christians? They are the Christians. They're also the Christians who participate in the scouts and the processions. These are Christians who lived here since Jesus' time. Probably part of the early community, maybe some joined later on. They spoke Greek, Hebrew, Aramaic, other languages. They believe in Jesus. They prayed in the churches of the Holy Land since the 7th century, when the Arabs came from the Arab Peninsula and created a huge Arab empire. Everyone started to speak Arabic, so they speak Arabic, so they can be called Arab Christians. They live in Palestine, so they would be called Arab Christian Palestinian. Some of them are Catholic, some of them are Orthodox, some of them are Lutheran or Anglican or Syrian or Copts. But these are the Christians of the Holy Land. And they always quote the letter to Peter that talks about the living stones. And I'm not sure if, there are many ways to interpret it or to interpret this verse from the letter to Peter, but they said the living stones that the letter is talking about, for which you will build your spiritual house. It's not just a spiritual house that would replace the temple with the stones, the building where sacrifice were brought. Jesus was talking about a spiritual temple that is built by the community. The community is the new temple, and their prayers are the sacrifices that God wants now. But they take it they interpret it a little bit different and say, well, you have the stones, you pilgrims, you tourists who come to visit the Holy Land, you come to see the stones, you come to see the buildings where Jesus lived, where he was born, where he did his miracle, but we're the living stones. And without us, you will just have a Disneyland of holy places. You will just have a museum. And it's painful to enter a church and think that no one else is coming to pray except for the tourists. And maybe you don't think about it when you see Jerusalem or Bethlehem during normal days, but when you come down to the Church of Nativity, the only people who go and pray there are the living stones, the people from Bethlehem. And if they were not there, it was an empty church. So they're maintaining the spirit of the place by going there every Sunday, by celebrating the I want to say circumcision, by celebrating baptism and confirmation, and celebrating mass every week, and celebrating weddings and funerals. That makes the place, the stones, living stones by the community who lives there. So they're very, very important. And when we talk about being there, we're talking about being with, when you, as a Christian, you have to be also not just to be with the places, but also to be with the people, to remember them. So we have Christians all over the Holy Land, in the West Bank, in Israel. The politics are always involved. I mean, you always read the situation in the context of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but we have to remember that even for us as Jews, these people maintaining these holy places for the Christian world. And you can come and visit, you as Christian can come and visit, but they're there to maintain it, to make it a place of worship, a house of God, not just a museum of holy places. And therefore, the living stones are part of the stones of the Holy Land. And this is the Archbishop of Jerusalem. He's now the Apostolic Administrator. He's not the Patriarch of Jerusalem, but he's standing before Christmas time with young women from Bethlehem dressed in traditional Palestinian dresses. There are different traditional dresses for Muslim women, for Christian women, but they come with their traditional clothes to celebrate Christmas together with him. So when we talk about the Holy Land, and so they're also the one, the scouts, they're coming from all over the Holy Land. So during Christmas time, I was asking about the scouts, they come from Bethlehem and from Haifa and from Nazareth and from Akko and from Jericho, and some of the participants are not even Christian, but they're Muslims who participate in the Christian Scouts, and each denomination has its own scout. So the Catholics and the Orthodox and the Syriac and the Copts and the Armenian, each one, actually the Armenian have two, each one has its own scouts, and they all celebrate together. And this is really the culture of the Holy Land. If you really have time during the tour, you can also visit the Shepherd's Field in Bethlehem and the Milk Grotto, which is just next to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, where Mary was sitting and breastfeeding Jesus, and a drop of her milk went down the floor and colored the cave in white. But these are all just part of the experience of Bethlehem. To be in Bethlehem, to be reminded of King David, of him being chosen from the small one in the clown to lead the people, the small one in the clown 1,000 years later was chosen to lead the world into a different place. And these places help you to be reminded of that, and the people help you to maintain it, or to keep it for you. And when you go there, don't forget that you don't go just to see the place where Jesus was born, but you go to see the other Christians who stand in line with you to get into the birthplace of Jesus. Look around you and see the diversity within Christianity, the multiculturalism in the city and among the tourists who come. And that will make the experience of being in the Holy Land much more meaningful. It would give an extra meaning to the experience of reading the scriptures. Yep. Now, I didn't answer the question all the way, but
yeah, there was a couple of questions. First of all, I just want to say,
and I will close the presentation. I'll be able to see.
As Reverend Georgia pointed out in her last tour, that we took a women's group and they went to the Bethlehem Church, and they got together with the modern stones, the Christians of the Holy Land. Hannah, there's a couple questions there. I think.
Do you have remarks that I read?
Yeah, Lindsay had a question about, I have to find it now. Wait, where was it?
Yeah, so there was a question about the mural on the wall, the separation wall. Yeah, it's an interesting one. So there are a lot of graffitis on the separation wall. The wall that it's the anti-terrorist barrier, I think the official name in Israel, but it's just called the wall. One of the walls we have in the Holy Land. I have to tell a story. So I was guiding once a group of soldiers, and we looked at the different walls of the city. I was talking about the old city wall, and I was talking about the walls of the temple, and then I showed them also the wall, the separation wall. And we talked about the fact that in Jerusalem, all the buildings are built in stone or covered with stone. But as you can see, the separation wall is made of concrete and is not covered with stone.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the soldiers, where was it? It was here. Here it is. And one of the soldiers said, yes, the walls that covered with bedrock, with limestone, these are the walls that we want to maintain them. It's part of the heritage of the city. But this wall is only temporary one. So it's only concrete. Hopefully there'll be peace and we won't need walls between us. But so there are many graffitis on the wall, and there's a monastery, a convent of women next to this area where this icon was painted. And they had an artist making icon writer who made this icon on the wall, and they call it Mary of Bethlehem. And again, the mother Mary, her connection to the locals, the prayers of the people. So and there's kind of a door that connects between Israel and Bethlehem. So I think that was the idea behind it. There are not so many other religious icons on the wall. This is quite unique, and I think it's very interesting, and that's why I decided to add it to the presentation. Other questions? No, at least there's the other question. Many
there was a question about
percentage of Christians living in
Bethlehem.
Bethlehem.
Exactly. Is it 10%? I wasn't sure.
So the surveys that were done in 2009, so we don't have accurate numbers, but there are about 40,000 people in Bethlehem. About 30% are Christian. In Bet Jala, Bet Zachor, about 70%. There are many Palestinians from Bethlehem who immigrated outside of the Holy Land. You can find a huge community of Palestinians from Bethlehem in Chile, in South America in general, and other places. It's a process that continues since the 19th century. Christian can immigrate. They have connections. They have connection with European countries, with other churches. They have family relation with people in the West, and they decide that they want to try in a place where they're not labeled as Christians or as Arabs. So in Bethlehem, there are Christians. In Israel, there are Arabs. And economical reasons as well. So many of them immigrate. So the percentage is going down. And also we have a question of birth rate. The birth rate of Christian is much lower than the birth rate of Jews and Muslims in Israel and in the West Bank. So their percentage is going down all the time, even if the number is quite stable. But there's emigration also to the West, to Western countries all the time. So
but
we're talking about 30%.
Isn't it still the one country in the Middle East that it still has overall a growing number of Christians in the Holy Land?
So I would say not growing, but stable. It depends on who do you count as Christian. Because if you count Israelis who came based on the law of return that actually follow Christianity, then you will have growing number. But if you look at a Palestinian Christian in Israel and in the West Bank, it's kind of a steady number.
Okay.
It's not growing, but they're not escaping like in Iraq, Syria, in other places where the life is in risk. So it's quite...
And Hannah, could you possibly address the fact that there are some laws that relate to the fact that Christians have to be a mayor in certain areas?
Yeah, so in Bethlehem, right, in Bethlehem, in Ramallah as well, the mayor is supposed to be Christian. And that's kind of a tradition in the Palestinian authorities. They have a special minister for the Christian minority, and they try, the Palestinian authorities are, it's supposed, like the PLO, they're not supposed to be a religious organization. It's a national organization. Therefore, they pay a lot of attention to the Christian minority. They also know that the Christian minority is very strong in sense of socioeconomical status, and therefore it's very important to help them to maintain their presence in the West Bank as well. So so they try to maintain these rules, and they try to make sure that they would feel comfortable enough to stay. Again, it doesn't always work, because you have also militant Muslim parties within the Palestinian land, but they try, but they pay a lot of attention to that.
Thank you.
Okay.
Questions?
Hannah, thank you. I don't know if there's any other questions, but this has been absolutely fascinating. I want to thank Hannah. I'm sure if anybody else has a question here, I know she might have to go, but perhaps Itamar can also assist. Thank you also to everybody who joined tonight. I know next week we're going to be doing the Dead Sea Valley with Masada and a few other things. If you have questions, I know there's a lot of new people, please leave me your email so I can put you on our list to invite you for next week. For those of you who are supporting this, thank you so much. If those of you who are new, if you enjoyed this program, please think about making some sort of a, maybe you might want to think about making a contribution. I'm going to write here to what address. We're not charging for this. But of course, obviously, any support is greatly appreciated. We love doing this, and we hope that you are all getting.
We lost you, Lisa.
A very safe and peaceful. You just ask.
Elisa, we cannot hear you.
If anybody has
Oh, it's
questions,
just me.
there or hey. Okay. Oh, hi,
Hannah,
Linda. Hannah, thank you.
Hannah, can I ask Hannah a question?
Sorry?
Yeah, sure, I'm here.
Okay, Hannah, I know the Muslims, they view Jesus as being a good prophet. How does Jews view Jesus? And then the second part of the question, they did not accept Jesus as being the Messiah. Are Jews still waiting for a Messiah?
It's better here.
So I will tell. I guess different people will have different answers. We see Jesus as a rabbi, as a teacher, as a very prominent figure who influenced a lot of people in the Second Temple at the end, toward the end, the first century, and toward the end of the Second Temple period. And I personally, and I guess different people will give a different answer. I personally love to look at the things that are told about him, and as I said, and see what I can learn from that as a Jew. I would say something about the word Messiah, but I would look at him as a teacher, and I think many Jews who would also say this team has a teacher. Regarding the Messiah, it's a good question, because again, depends who you ask. Different people would say different things about what is the Messiah. It's not such a central thing in Judaism as it is in Christianity. I mean, you can wait for the Messiah, and if you don't believe in the Messiah, it's also fine in Judaism. Judaism is more about how you live your life now and here, and how you follow the commandments. So I personally don't have a specific concept of what is the Messiah. I would say that for me, if we'll have peace in the world and no racism and people would love each other, for me that would be kind of a period of kingdom of heaven for me, if I would use Christian terminology. I'm not waiting for a specific person to come and change the world. I'm waiting for us to get to a specific time, and I would say this is the times of the Messiah, this is the time of peace. But you'll get different things from different people, and some people say, yes, we're waiting for a person to come. So there's a joke I always tell, and maybe you've heard it from Elisa from Itamar, that you know, when the Messiah would come, would ask him, is that the first time or second time? If he would say second time, then Christian are right. If he said it's the first time, then we're right. But yeah, but we don't have a very clear concept about the Messiah. We'll hear different things from different people.
Thank you.
Good.
Okay, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Dr. Hannah, thank you so much for your presentation. Really awesome. You mentioned that you taught a class, or you're teaching a class on racism. Did you say?
Yeah, we teach them. We actually teach teachers how to create a discussion and to lead a conversation about topics as racism. But racism not, you know, have different meanings. But yes.
And how do you all define racism there in Israel? What kind of racism are you dealing with there?
Yeah, all kind of racism. It could be between people of different ethnic background, from different nations, between Arab and Jews, between non-religious Jews and ultra-Orthodox Jews. So it's not necessarily based on race. We use the word racism in general of tension between different groups with different agendas, between groups with different way of living, with even different political opinions. So just finding a way, so it's a general name for tensions between groups and not necessarily race issue. But we also have race issues here between people from different backgrounds, or ethnical or colors or whatever. Not all these pieces, I don't have the right PC word for that, but so this is also something to discuss. But it's very diverse and very varied.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Hannah, thank you so much.
With pleasure. It was a
Really
pleasure,
appreciate it.
and thank you for your patience. I was talking without stopping and allowing you to ask questions. That's what happened. I was trying to make it slowly here and create a conversation, but it just doesn't happen. So hopefully I'll be able to see you in real life in Jerusalem or in Bethlehem.
Totally. No, I'm sure that many of the group leaders who are here tonight, when they come next to Israel, I have a feeling I'm going to get a bunch of requests to make sure that you're in the program. So
or at
thank
least,
you.
I mean, just to pass by when
Come by,
I see you in
absolutely.
Jerusalem, going with another guide. It's just to see you in Jerusalem.
Yeah.
That's next year in Jerusalem. That's what we say.
Nachon,
Shana
Shana
B'Av
B'Av.
Yerushalayim.
I hope so. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Stay
safe,
healthy and safe.
yes, safe, peaceful,
Thank you.
blessed week. And thank you so much. And I'll be in touch in the next day about what we're doing next Sunday when we go to the Dead Sea Valley. So with
Thank you.
Itamar.
And it's not, you're lucky because it's going to be terribly hot there, but you're not going to
Not
be
on mine. So much she can do. That's right.
Yeah.
All right.
Okay. Bye.
Okay. Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.
Thank
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
you. It was
Thank
very
you.
good.
Thank you.